Part 1. The wagon lurched to a stop, and Clara Whitmore felt her stomach drop with it. 6 days. 6 brutal days of rattling bones and dust in her throat, and the constant fear that the axle would snap on some godforsaken rock and leave her stranded between towns that didn't exist yet. 6 days of telling herself it would be worth it when she finally saw Edgar Boone's face again, the man who'd written those careful letters promising her a new life, a real life, out here where nobody knew her past. She'd believed him. God, she'd actually believed him. The driver, a leathery man named Pike, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words the entire journey, climbed down and opened the back gate without looking at her. "Boone's place," he grunted. Clara stepped down carefully, her legs shaky from days of sitting. Her dress was filthy, the hem black with trail dust, despite her best efforts to keep it clean. She'd wanted to look presentable when she arrived, wanted Edgar to see her and remember why he'd asked her to come. The ranch spread out before her, bigger than she'd imagined. A main house, 2 barns, corrals filled with horses. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow even though it was late spring. The air smelled like pine and something sharper, animal dung probably, or hay going sour in the heat. A group of men stood near the largest barn, watching her. She counted 5 of them, all dressed in work clothes, all staring like she was some kind of circus act that had rolled into town. "Which one is Edgar?" she asked Pike. He nodded toward a tall man in the center, the one wearing a clean shirt and a hat that looked expensive. "That's him." Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She smoothed her skirt, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and walked toward the group with what she hoped looked like confidence. Edgar Boone didn't smile when he saw her. Didn't move at all, actually. Just stood there with his arms crossed, watching her approach like she was a horse he was considering buying. "Mr. Boone," Clara said when she reached him. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I know who you are." His voice was flat, empty of warmth. "You're late. The wagon broke down outside of..." "Doesn't matter." He looked her up and down, and something cold moved behind his eyes. "You bring the papers?" "Papers." "Right. The letters from her previous marriage, the documents proving she was legally divorced, free to marry again. She'd packed them carefully in her trunk, wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. "Yes, they're in my... Good. We'll need those." He turned to one of the other men, a younger guy with a scraggly beard. "Tom, get her trunk." Tom moved toward the wagon, but Edgar held up a hand. "Wait." Everyone went still. Clara felt the shift immediately, the way the air seemed to tighten around her. "Before we go any further," Edgar said slowly, "there's something I need to know." Clara's throat went dry. "What is it, Tom?" "In your letters, you never mentioned children." His eyes locked onto hers. "You have any? From the first marriage?" No, I don't have children." "Why not?" The question hit her like a slap. She felt her face go hot, felt every man's eyes on her, waiting for an answer to something that wasn't any of their damn business. "I don't think that's..." "Answer the question, Clara." Edgar's voice had gone hard now, sharp-edged. "You were married for 5 years, according to your letters. 5 years and no children. That seemed normal to you?" She wanted to run, wanted to turn around, climb back in that wagon, and tell Pike to drive her anywhere else, anywhere at all, just not here. But she had $17 left to her name. No family. No home to go back to. She'd burned every bridge getting here, convinced this was her only shot at starting over. "The doctor said I couldn't," she whispered. "I can't have children." The words fell into the dirt between them like stones. Edgar stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, ugly sound that made her flinch. "You can't have children," he repeated. "You came all the way out here, made me wait for you, made me turn down other offers. And you can't even give me sons?" "I didn't know you wanted..." "What the hell else would I want a wife for?" He stepped closer, and Clara stumbled backward. "You think I need someone to cook and clean? I got men for that. You think I need company? I got a whorehouse in town for that." He spat into the dirt near her feet. "A wife is supposed to give a man heirs. That's the deal. That's the whole goddamn point. Mr. Boone, please. You lied to me." His voice was rising now, loud enough that she could hear movement from the house, people coming to see what the shouting was about. "You knew what I wanted, and you lied because you were desperate." I didn't lie. You never asked. Get out! The shout echoed off the barn walls. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not in front of these men, not in front of him. I came all this way, she said quietly. I sold everything I had. I can't just... That's not my problem, Edgar turned to Tom. Put her trunk back on the wagon. Pike, you take her back to town and dump her wherever. I don't care where. Pike shifted uncomfortably. Town's 40 miles back, storms coming in. I was planning to... Did I ask what you were planning? Edgar pulled out a wallet, counted out several bills, and shoved them at Pike. That's double your rate. Take her now. Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Mr. Boone, please listen to me. I can still be useful. I can work. You can't do the one thing I need. He looked at her with such complete contempt that she felt it in her bones. You're useless to me, Clara. Worse than useless. You're a goddamn waste of time. One of the other men laughed. Actually laughed, like this was entertainment for him. Pike grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly. Come on, ma'am, let's go. No. Clara pulled free, turned back to Edgar. You wrote me letters. You made promises. You can't just... Watch me. Edgar nodded to two of his men. Get her in the wagon. If she fights, tie her down. They moved toward her, and Clara's last shred of dignity finally snapped. She turned and ran, not toward the wagon, but away from it, away from the ranch, toward the tree line where the mountains started. Behind her, someone shouted. She heard boots on hard ground getting closer, but she didn't stop. Her skirts tangled around her legs, and she nearly fell, caught herself, kept running. The first drops of rain hit her face just as she reached the trees. Let her go, Edgar's voice carried across the clearing. Stupid woman wants to die in the woods. That's her choice. I got work to do. The footsteps behind her stopped. Clara kept running, branches whipping at her face and arms, the rain coming harder now, turning the ground slick. Thunder rolled overhead, so close it rattled her teeth. She had no idea where she was going. Didn't matter. Anywhere was better than back there, standing in front of those men while they laughed at her, called her useless, threw her away like garbage. The rain turned into a downpour. Clara's dress was soaked through in seconds, heavy as iron, dragging at her with every step. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she kept moving, stumbling between trees that all looked the same, no path, no direction, just forward. Lightning split the sky, and in that brief flash of white light, Clara saw a massive tree ahead, an old grandfather of a pine, its trunk wider than three men standing side by side. She staggered toward it and collapsed at its base, her back against the bark, rain streaming down her face. This was it then. This was where she'd die. Alone in the wilderness, rejected by the only man who'd offered her a future, with nothing to show for 32 years of life, except a trail of failures and a body that couldn't do the one thing women were supposed to do. She pulled her knees to her chest and let herself cry, really cry, the kind of gasping sobs that hurt coming out. The storm swallowed the sound. Lightning lit up the forest again and again, thunder so loud it felt like the mountain itself was breaking apart. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. The cold sank into her bones. Her fingers went numb. The shaking started deep in her core and spread outward until her whole body was convulsing. Maybe this was better. Maybe dying out here was kinder than going back, than facing another town full of people who'd eventually figure out she was broken inside, damaged goods, not worth keeping. She closed her eyes. That's when she heard the voice. Miss? Miss, can you hear me? Clara's eyes flew open. A man stood a few feet away, rain pouring off the brim of his hat. He was big, tall and broad-shouldered, with a heavy coat and boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. Behind him, she could make out smaller figures, children. Several of them, huddled together under a piece of canvas. You hurt? The man asked. He didn't come closer, didn't make any sudden moves, just stood there, waiting for an answer. Clara tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed to shake her head. You got somewhere to be? Someone looking for you? Another head shake. The man was quiet for a moment, rain drumming on his hat. Then he turned to the children. Samuel, give me the spare blanket. One of the kids, a boy maybe 10 years old, stepped forward and handed over a wool blanket that had stayed mostly dry under the canvas. The man took it, moved slowly toward Clara, and held it out. "My name's Caleb Mercer," he said. "I got a cabin about half a mile from here. You're welcome to wait out the storm there. No obligations, no questions. You can leave whenever you want." He paused. "But if you stay out here much longer, you're going to freeze to death." Clara stared at the blanket in his hands. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to leave her alone, let her finish what she'd started. But another part, a deeper, more stubborn part, wasn't quite ready to give up yet. She reached out with shaking hands and took the blanket. Caleb helped her stand. Her legs barely held her weight, and he caught her elbow when she swayed. "Easy now. Samuel, you and Ruth take the rear. Everyone else, stay close." The children fell into formation like they'd done this before, and Clara realized they probably had. This wasn't some chance encounter. Caleb Mercer had been out in this storm with his kids for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it had brought him to her. They walked through the forest in single file, Caleb in front, Clara stumbling along behind him, the children bringing up the rear. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the storm and their footsteps squelching through mud. The cabin appeared suddenly, materializing out of the rain like something from a dream. It was bigger than she'd expected, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Light glowed in the windows, real glass windows, not just shutters, and Clara felt something crack open in her chest at the sight of it. Caleb pushed the door open. "Everyone inside. Ruth, stoke the fire. Samuel, hang up the wet gear. Margaret, check if we got any stew left." The children scattered to their tasks without argument. Clara stood in the doorway, dripping onto the floor, feeling like an intruder. The cabin was crowded but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its fire burning strong and hot. Beds lined the other walls, more than she could quickly count. A table in the center was scarred with use but scrubbed spotless. Shelves held dishes, supplies, books. Everything had a place. "Sit." Caleb pointed to a chair near the fire. "Get that wet dress off before you catch your death." Clara's face went hot. I don't have anything else to—" "Margaret?" Caleb called toward the back of the cabin. A girl appeared, maybe 14 or 15, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Yes, Pa?" "Get one of your mother's old dresses, something dry." Margaret's eyes went wide for just a second, a flash of something Clara couldn't read, but she nodded and disappeared behind a curtain that divided the sleeping areas. Clara lowered herself into the chair. The heat from the fire was almost painful against her frozen skin. She couldn't stop shaking. Caleb was moving around the cabin, checking on his kids, murmuring instructions. Clara counted them. 9 children in total, ranging from what looked like maybe 6 years old to Margaret at 15. 9 kids and 1 father. No mother. Margaret returned with a dress, plain brown wool, well made but worn soft with age. "There's a screen in the corner," she said quietly. "You can change behind it." "Thank you," Clara managed. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the screen. Peeling off the wet dress felt like shedding skin. She hung it over the screen to dry and pulled on the borrowed dress. It fit well enough, a little loose through the waist, a little short at the hem, but dry and warm. When she came out, Caleb had a bowl of stew waiting for her. "Eat," he said simply. Clara sat back down and took the bowl. Her hands were still shaking so badly she almost dropped the spoon, but she managed to get it to her mouth. The stew was simple: venison, potatoes, onions, some kind of herb she couldn't identify, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. She ate slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her body. The children had gathered around the table, doing evening tasks. One was mending clothes, another was working on what looked like arithmetic problems. The younger ones were playing some kind of quiet game with wooden blocks. They kept glancing at her. Curious looks, not hostile, but wary, like they'd learned to be careful around strangers. "Pa," one of the younger boys said, "is she staying?" "That's up to her, Benjamin," Caleb replied. He was sitting at the head of the table, working on a piece of harness that needed repair. "She'll stay tonight at minimum. Storm's not fit for travel." Benjamin considered this. "What's your name?" he asked Clara. Clara Whitmore." "I'm Benjamin. I'm 8. That's Ruth. She's 6. That's Samuel. He's 10. Margaret, you met. That's John. He's 12. And Thomas? He's 13. And William? He's 14. And those are the twins, Matthew and Mark. They're 9. Clara tried to match names to faces, knowing she'd never remember them all. That's a lot of children. Ma had a lot of love to give, Benjamin said matter-of-factly. Then softer, before she died. The cabin went quiet. Clara saw Caleb's hand still on the harness, saw the way Margaret's shoulders tensed. I'm sorry, Clara said. I didn't mean to. It's been 2 years, Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral. We manage. But Clara could see the cracks in that management, the way Thomas's shirt had a button missing, the way Ruth's hair wasn't quite braided right, the exhaustion in Caleb's eyes when he thought no one was looking. They were managing, yes, but barely. How'd you end up in the forest? Samuel asked. During a storm. Samuel. Caleb's voice held a warning. What'd I say about questions? Sorry, Pa. Clara finished her stew and set the bowl down. It's all right. I came west to marry someone. It didn't work out. Why not? Ruth asked, her voice high and curious. Ruth, enough. Caleb stood up. Everyone to bed. Morning comes early. The children groaned but started moving, heading behind the curtains where Clara assumed the beds were. Margaret lingered, looking like she wanted to say something, but Caleb shook his head and she followed the others. When they were alone, Caleb turned to Clara. You can have Margaret's bed tonight. She'll bunk with Ruth. Tomorrow, if the storm's passed, I'll take you into town. There's a boarding house there, run by a decent woman. She might have work for you, or at least know someone who does. Thank you, Clara said. For tonight. For everything. Caleb nodded. Can't leave someone to die in the woods. Not how I was raised. He hesitated, then added, Whatever happened with that man, whatever he said to you, it's not worth dying over. You understand me? Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. She blinked them back. I understand. Good. He picked up his coat. I'm going to check the animals before I turn in. Make yourself comfortable. He went out into the storm, leaving Clara alone by the fire. She sat there for a long time, listening to the rain on the roof, the crackle of burning wood, the soft sounds of children settling into sleep. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and cooking and something else. Life, maybe. The kind of life that kept going even when it got hard, even when it hurt. Eventually she stood and made her way behind the curtain to Margaret's bed. It was narrow but clean, the blankets tucked tight. She slid under them and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd figure out what came next. Tomorrow she'd face the fact that she had nowhere to go and no money to get there. But tonight, she was warm and dry and alive. And maybe that was enough. Clara woke to the sound of movement and whispered, arguing. Can't just let her sleep. Pa said not to wake her. Pa also said breakfast is at sunrise, and it's past that now. So let him wake her. Clara opened her eyes. Pale morning light filtered through gaps in the curtain. She could hear footsteps, the clank of dishes, the crackle of a fire being built up. She sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's run through the forest. The borrowed dress was twisted around her legs, and her hair had come completely loose from its pins. When she pushed the curtain aside, she found the cabin transformed. The morning light showed details she'd missed last night, carved wooden animals on a shelf, children's drawings pinned to the wall, a rocking chair by the fire with a basket of mending beside it. The table was set for breakfast, and the children were already seated, waiting. All of them turned to look at her when she appeared. Morning, Caleb said. He was at the stove, frying something that smelled amazing. You sleep all right? Yes. Thank you. Clara felt awkward standing there in a dead woman's dress, aware that she was disrupting their routine. I can help with Sit, Caleb interrupted. You're a guest. Clara sat in the empty chair between Ruth and Benjamin. The children stared at her with open curiosity now that it was daylight and they could see her properly. Your hair's pretty, Ruth said suddenly. Ruth, manners, Margaret said from across the table. What? It is pretty. It's all long and brown and shiny. Thank you, Ruth, Clara said, touched despite herself. Caleb brought the food to the table, fried eggs, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire, bacon that must have come from their own pigs. Simple food, but there was plenty of it, and the children ate with good appetite. Clara picked at her plate. Her stomach was in knots, knowing that after breakfast, Caleb would take her into town and she'd have to face reality. No money, no prospects, no husband, no future. You know how to read? Benjamin asked around a mouthful of bread. Benjamin, don't talk with your mouth full, Margaret said automatically. Benjamin swallowed. Do you? Yes, I can read. Can you teach? The question caught Clara off guard. I suppose so. I used to help at a school back east before I married. We need a teacher, Benjamin announced. Pa tries, but he's not very good at the reading parts. Benjamin, Caleb warned. Well, you're not. You can do numbers fine, but when William asked you about that history book, you just said, figure it out yourself. William, the 14-year-old, looked mortified. Ben, shut up. I'm just saying we need help and she knows how to read and… Enough! Caleb's voice cut through the chatter. Claire's not staying. She's got her own life to sort out. The children fell silent, but Clara could feel their disappointment like a physical thing. After breakfast, Caleb hitched up the wagon while the children cleared the table. Clara helped Margaret wash the dishes, neither of them speaking. When she finished, she went behind the screen to put her own dress back on. It had dried overnight, but was still stained and wrinkled from yesterday's disaster. She looked terrible, felt worse. You ready? Caleb appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. Clara nodded. She started to fold Margaret's borrowed dress, but the girl stopped her. Keep it, Margaret said quietly. Ma would have wanted you to have something decent to wear. I can't take your mother's… Please. Margaret's eyes were intense. It's just sitting in a trunk anyway. She'd want it used. Clara swallowed hard. Thank you. The ride into town was quiet. Caleb drove the wagon with easy competence, the horses responding to his slightest touch. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and bright. Water dripped from pine branches, and the mountains stood sharp against a blue sky. Under other circumstances, Clara might have thought it was beautiful. About last night, Caleb said after they'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes. What Benjamin said about teaching, ignore that. Kids get ideas. It's all right. It's not about you being capable. You probably are. It's just… He paused, choosing words carefully. Frontier's not kind to women living alone. And a woman living with a widower and his children? People talk. They'd make your life hell. Clara stared at her hands. People already made my life hell. That's how I ended up in your forest. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, what happened with the man you came to marry? Clara didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to relive the humiliation. But something about Caleb's steady, patient silence made the words come out anyway. His name was Edgar Boone. We'd been writing letters for months. He seemed kind, decent. He had a successful ranch, a good reputation. She twisted her fingers together. I was married before, back east. It didn't work out. My husband said I was cold, said I didn't know how to be a proper wife, said it was my fault we had no children. She could feel Caleb listening, really listening, not judging. The doctor told me I probably couldn't have children. Something about my body being wrong, somehow. My husband divorced me over it. Said what was the point of a wife who couldn't give him sons? Her voice went flat. So when Edgar wrote to me, when he said he wanted a partner, someone to build a life with, I thought maybe it didn't matter to him. I thought maybe out here things would be different. But they weren't, Caleb said quietly. No. The second I told him about the children, that I couldn't have them, he lost his mind. Called me useless. Called me a liar. Had his men throw me off his property. She looked up at the sky, blinking back tears. I thought dying in that storm would be easier than facing another town full of people who'd eventually figure out I'm broken. The wagon rolled on for a while. Then Caleb said, my wife died in childbirth. Her and the baby both. It was her 9th time bringing a child into this world, and her body just couldn't do it anymore. Clara turned to look at him. His face was impassive, but she could see the old pain in the lines around his eyes. The doctor said she should have stopped after 6. Said another pregnancy would kill her, but she wanted more children, and He shook his head. I should have been stronger, should have told her no, but I let her make the choice, and it killed her. That's not your fault, Clara said. Maybe, maybe not. He looked at her directly for the first time that morning. Point is, bodies fail sometimes. Women's bodies, men's bodies, doesn't matter. Doesn't make you broken, just makes you human. Something in Clara's chest loosened just a fraction. Edgar Boone's a fool, Caleb continued, and your ex-husband, too. Any man who measures a woman's worth by whether she can breed is thinking like a rancher with his livestock, not a human being with a partner. The town came into view, a scattering of buildings along a single main street. Clara could see a general store, a church, what looked like a saloon, and a larger building with a sign she couldn't read from this distance. That's Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Caleb said, pointing to the larger building. She's fair, and she don't tolerate nonsense from her boarders. You tell her I sent you, she'll find you something. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. Clara climbed down, her legs stiff from sitting. Thank you, she said. For everything, for last night, for the ride, for Clara. She stopped. Caleb was looking at her with something that might have been concern, or might have been just exhaustion. She couldn't tell. If things don't work out with Mrs. Patterson, you come back to the cabin. You hear me? Don't go running into another storm. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing around a corner. Then she turned and walked up the steps to the boarding house, trying to convince herself this would work out, trying to believe she had options. The door opened before she could knock. A woman stood there, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing an apron over a practical dress. She looked Clara up and down in one quick assessment. "You're the woman from the Boone place," she said. It wasn't a question. Clara's stomach sank. News travels fast. News travels at exactly one speed in a town this size. Instant. Mrs. Patterson, because this had to be Mrs. Patterson, stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you could use coffee and a conversation. In that order." The boarding house was clean and well kept, with a parlor off to one side and a dining room visible through another doorway. Mrs. Patterson led her to the kitchen and pointed at a chair. "Sit." Clara sat. Mrs. Patterson poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the stove and handed one to Clara. Then she sat down across from her and said, "So, Edgar Boone threw you out in a storm because you can't have children. That about sum it up?" Clara's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Who told you?" "Tom Hendricks was at the saloon last night, drunk as a lord, telling everyone about the Barren mail-order bride who showed up and got tossed right back out." Mrs. Patterson's mouth was a thin line. "Edgar's always been a bastard, but that was low even for him." "I didn't lie to him," Clara said. "He never asked. I would have told him." "I believe you. Doesn't matter, though. Damage is done. Whole town knows your business now." Clara felt the last of her hope crumble. "Then I should probably move on. I don't want to cause trouble." "Move on where? You got money?" "A little. Not much." "Family?" "No." "Friends in other towns?" "No." Mrs. Patterson sipped her coffee. "Then you stay here. I need help running this place anyway. Room and board plus a small wage. You cook?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Yes." "Deal with drunk men being inappropriate?" Clara thought about Edgar's men laughing at her. "I can learn." Mrs. Patterson cracked what might have been a smile. "Good. You start today. There's a room on the 3rd floor, small but private. You'll take meals with the boarders and help with the cooking and cleaning. I don't tolerate laziness or drama. You cause problems, you're out. Understood?" Clara felt dizzy with relief. "Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'll work hard. I promise. Call me Ada, and I know you will." Ada stood up. "Come on, I'll show you your room. You can get settled and then help me with lunch." The room was tiny, barely big enough for a narrow bed and a small dresser, but it had a window that looked out onto the mountains, and it was hers. Clara sat on the bed and let herself breathe for the first time since yesterday. She had a job, a place to sleep, a chance to start over, even if the whole town knew her shame. It would have to be enough. The work at Ada Patterson's boarding house was harder than Clara expected, and she'd expected it to be brutal. By the end of her first week, her hands were raw from scrubbing floors, her back ached from hauling water, and she'd learned to time her trips through the dining room to avoid the worst of the male boarders. The ones who stared too long, or made comments under their breath that they thought she couldn't hear. But she had a roof over her head and food in her stomach, and after what happened at Edgar Boone's ranch, that felt like a miracle she didn't deserve. The town, though. The town was a different problem. "That's her," a woman whispered loudly as Clara passed the general store on her way back from buying flour. "The Barren one who tried to trap Edgar Boone." Clara kept walking, her face burning, the flour sack heavy in her arms. I heard she lied on every letter, another voice chimed in. Told him she was practically a virgin, practically a girl still. She's got to be 30 if she's a day. Desperate, that's what she is. Pathetic. Clara made it around the corner before her hands started shaking. She set the flour down on a bench and pressed her palms against her thighs, breathing slowly until the urge to scream or cry or run passed. This was her life now. This was what she'd bought with her $17 and her desperation, a job that worked her to the bone and a town that would never let her forget her shame. She picked up the flour and kept walking. At the boarding house, Ada was in the kitchen dealing with a crisis involving burned biscuits and a boarder who'd complained loudly enough that the whole second floor heard him. "Where the hell have you been?" Ada snapped when Clara came in. "Getting flour, like you asked." "That was 40 minutes ago." The store was crowded. It was a lie, but Clara didn't have the energy to explain about standing behind that corner waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Ada looked at her sharply, then sighed. "Fine. Get those biscuits remade. Dinner's in 2 hours, and we're already behind." Clara tied on her apron and got to work, grateful for something to do with her hands, something that didn't involve thinking about the whispers or the stares or the crushing weight of knowing she'd never escape what Edgar Boone had made her. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the boarders had retreated to their rooms or the saloon, Clara sat on her bed and counted her wages. Ada paid her at the end of each week. Not much, but honest money for honest work. She was adding up how long it would take to save enough to leave town when someone knocked on her door. "It's open," Clara called. Ada came in, looking tired. She sat down on the edge of Clara's bed without asking permission, which seemed to be her way. "You planning to run?" Clara froze. "What?" "Don't play stupid. You're counting money and you got that look people get when they're planning an escape." Ada crossed her arms. "Where would you even go?" "I don't know, anywhere. Somewhere people don't know about—" Clara couldn't finish the sentence. "About Edgar Boone calling you Barren in front of half his ranch hands?" Ada's voice was matter-of-fact. "Honey, you can run to the next town or the next territory, but that story's going to follow you. Men like Tom Hendricks, they travel, they talk. You'll spend the rest of your life running from something that ain't even your fault." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Clara's voice cracked. "Stay here and let them whisper about me forever?" "You stay here and you make them see something else." Ada stood up. "Right now, all they see is Edgar's version of you. You stick around, you work hard, you show them who you actually are. Eventually, that's what they'll see instead." "You really believe that?" "I believe people are lazy. They'll believe whatever story takes the least effort. Right now, Edgar's story is the easy one. You make it harder by being undeniable." Ada headed for the door, then paused. "Also, Caleb Mercer's boy, Samuel, was by earlier. Said their father wants to know if you'd be willing to come teach the children reading twice a week. Offered to pay you." Clara's heart jumped. "He did?" "Told him I'd ask. It's up to you, but it's decent money, and those kids could use the help." Ada's expression softened slightly. "Think about it." She left, closing the door behind her. Clara lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. Teaching Caleb's children meant seeing them again, seeing the cabin, the mountains, the strange peace she'd felt that one morning around their breakfast table. It meant 2 days a week away from the whispers and stares. But it also meant spending time in a widower's home, which would give the gossips fresh ammunition. She thought about Benjamin asking if she could teach, about Ruth calling her hair pretty, about Margaret's fierce generosity with her mother's dress. She thought about Caleb saying bodies fail sometimes, doesn't make you broken. By morning, she'd made her decision. The walk to Caleb's cabin took 2 hours on foot, but Clara didn't mind. The mountain air was clean and sharp, and the farther she got from town, the easier it was to breathe. Samuel met her halfway, appearing on the trail like he'd been watching for her. "Pa said you might come. Are you really going to teach us?" "If your father still wants me to." "He does," he said. Samuel stopped himself, looking suddenly shy. "He said you were the first person in a long time who might actually help instead of just feeling sorry for us." That hit Clara harder than she expected. She knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of pity, how it could feel worse than contempt. "I'll try," she said simply. The cabin looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow, but also more solid. Chickens scratched in the yard, and she could see a vegetable garden that looked like it was barely holding its own against the weeds. Caleb was chopping wood behind the house. He'd taken his shirt off, and Clara caught herself staring at the muscles in his back before she looked away, embarrassed. "Miss Whitmore?" he called, setting down the axe. He grabbed his shirt from a fence post and shrugged it on. "Wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," Clara admitted, "but Ada said you were offering to pay, and I could use the money." Something flickered across Caleb's face, disappointment, maybe, that money was her only motivation, but he covered it quickly. "Fair enough. Come on inside. Kids are waiting." The children were indeed waiting, lined up at the table like soldiers at inspection. They'd clearly been told to be on their best behavior, and the effort was almost painful to watch. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," Margaret said formally. "Good morning." Clara set her bag down. "Should we start with what you already know? Margaret, can you read this?" She pulled out a book she'd borrowed from Ada, something about frontier history. Margaret read haltingly but competently. William and Thomas could read at about the same level. Samuel struggled with bigger words but pushed through. The younger ones knew their letters, but not much else. "All right," Clara said, "we'll split into groups. Margaret, William, Thomas, you three work on this chapter and then we'll discuss it. Samuel, John, twins, you're with me. We're going to practice sounding out words. Ruth, Benjamin," she looked at the youngest two. "Can you write your letters?" "Some," Ruth said quietly. "Then we'll practice that." For the next 2 hours, Clara moved between groups, correcting pronunciation, answering questions, praising progress. It was exhausting and chaotic, and the twins kept trying to distract each other, but Clara found herself smiling more than she had in weeks. When she called a break, the children scattered outside except for Margaret, who lingered by the table. "You're a good teacher," Margaret said. "Better than the last one." "There was someone before me?" "A woman from town. Mrs. Hendricks. She came once, took one look at how many of us there were, and never came back." Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. "Said it was too much work for what Pa could pay." Clara thought about Mrs. Hendricks. She'd seen her at church, a thin woman with pinched lips who always sat in the front pew. "Well, I'm not Mrs. Hendricks." "No," Margaret agreed. "You're not." That afternoon, after the lessons were done and the children had scattered to their chores, Caleb walked Clara partway back to town. "They liked you," he said. "That's not easy to do with 9 of them all at once. They're good kids. Smart, too, once you get them focused. Margaret said you were patient. That means something coming from her. She doesn't give compliments easy." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "Ada tells me the town's giving you trouble." Clara's stomach tightened. "It's fine." "It's not fine. I heard what Tom Hendricks has been saying. If I'd known he was gonna—" Caleb's jaw was tight. Edgar should have kept his mouth shut. Edgar did what men like him do. He protected his reputation by destroying mine. Clara kept her voice steady. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be." They'd reached the point where the trail split, one path back to town, one deeper into the mountains. Clara stopped, suddenly not wanting to go back to the boarding house, to the whispers and stares and the weight of being the woman Edgar Boone had thrown away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Caleb nodded. "Why did you offer to pay me to teach? You barely know me. For all you know, I could be everything Edgar said I was." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "That night in the storm, when I found you under that tree, you weren't crying about what Edgar did. You were crying because you believed him, because you thought you really were useless." He paused. "I know what that looks like. After my wife died, I spent 6 months believing it was my fault, that I'd killed her by being selfish. Took me a long time to realize that believing something doesn't make it true." Clara felt her throat tighten. "You're not useless, Clara, and my kids deserve someone who'll see them as more than just charity work or a burden." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Ada also mentioned you were thinking about leaving town. Figured giving you a reason to stay might be worth the money." "Why would you want me to stay?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Because good people are hard to find out here, and you seem like good people." He turned and headed back up the trail before Clara could respond, leaving her standing at the crossroads, wondering what the hell she was supposed to do with that. The weeks fell into a pattern. 2 days a week, Clara made the walk to Caleb's cabin and taught the children. The other days, she worked at the boarding house, enduring Ada's sharp tongue and the boarders' varying degrees of rudeness. The children improved steadily. Ruth learned to write her full name. The twins stopped fighting long enough to master a whole reader. Samuel discovered he loved stories about explorers and kept begging Clara to bring more books. Margaret was the revelation. Once Clara got past her defensive walls, she found a girl who was hungry for knowledge, who asked questions about history and geography and things Clara had to research to answer properly. Why did they fight in the Revolutionary War if they were just going to keep doing terrible things to people anyway? Margaret asked one afternoon, looking up from a history book. Clara blinked. What do you mean? I mean, they fought for freedom, but then they kept slaves. They said all men are created equal, but women couldn't vote. What's the point of a revolution if you only free the people you like? The twins had stopped their work to listen. William was watching Margaret with something like awe. Clara chose her words carefully. I think maybe the point is that freedom is a long fight, not a single battle. The revolution started something, but people are still working to finish it. That's a nice way of saying they were hypocrites, Margaret said flatly. Margaret, Caleb warned from across the room where he was mending a bridle. What? It's true. Clara caught Caleb's eye and saw something there that looked like exhausted pride, like he knew his daughter was right, but also knew that kind of rightness could get her hurt in a world that didn't like women speaking hard truths. Later, as Clara was packing up her books, Margaret approached her. Miss Whitmore, can I ask you something personal? Clara tensed. I suppose. Why did you stay? In town, I mean. Everyone knows what happened with Mr. Boone. Why didn't you just leave? The younger children had gone outside, but William and Thomas were still close enough to hear. Clara saw them exchange glances, clearly also curious. Honestly, at first I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. But now, Clara thought about Ada's advice, about making people see something else. Now I stay because running away from shame doesn't make it go away. It just means you carry it to new places. Does it get easier? Margaret's voice was quieter now. The shame? Clara looked at this girl who'd lost her mother, who was trying to hold her family together at 15, who asked the kinds of questions that made adults uncomfortable. I don't know yet, but I think maybe if you stand still long enough, if you don't let it define you, eventually people start seeing you instead of the story they heard. Margaret nodded slowly. That makes sense. As Clara walked home that evening, she realized she'd given Margaret advice she was still trying to believe herself. The turning point came on a Saturday in late July. Clara was at the general store buying cornmeal when she heard two women talking near the fabric display. Saw her going up to the Mercer place again. Every week, regular as clockwork, it's indecent. Teaching his children, that's what she claims. Teaching, right, and I'm the Queen of England. Clara's hand tightened on the cornmeal sack. She should have been used to it by now, but somehow it still felt like a slap every time. Excuse me. Clara turned. Margaret stood behind her wearing her mother's Sunday dress and an expression that could have cut glass. You have something to say about Miss Whitmore, Margaret said loudly. You say it where she can hear you. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut. The store went dead quiet. Everyone turned to stare. One of the women, Mrs. Hendricks of course, drew herself up. Young lady, you have no right to speak to your elders that way. And you have no right to spread lies about someone who's done nothing but help my family. Margaret's voice was steady but fierce. Miss Whitmore teaches us reading and mathematics and history. She walks 4 miles round trip twice a week to do it. She's patient with the little ones and challenges the older ones, and she's the first person since Ma died who didn't look at us like we were a tragedy she had to fix. Margaret, Clara started, but Margaret wasn't finished. You want to know what's indecent? Indecent is Tom Hendricks getting drunk and telling lies about a woman who never did anything to him. Indecent is Mr. Boone throwing someone away because she couldn't give him babies, like she's a broken horse or something. Indecent is all of you whispering about Miss Whitmore instead of helping her. Mrs. Hendricks' face had gone purple. I will be speaking to your father about this. Good. Tell him exactly what you said about Miss Whitmore. I'm sure he'll be real interested to hear it. Margaret grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward the door. Behind them, Clara heard the store erupt in whispers. but Margaret didn't slow down until they were outside. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said quietly. "Yes, I did." Margaret's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. They've been saying terrible things for weeks, and nobody stops them. Somebody had to. Clara pulled Margaret into a hug, feeling the girl's thin shoulders shake. "Thank you. That was incredibly brave and probably incredibly stupid." Margaret laughed, muffled against Clara's shoulder. "Pa's gonna kill me." "No, he won't." Clara pulled back, wiping at her own eyes. "But we should probably go tell him before Mrs. Hendricks does." They walked back to the cabin together, and Clara told her what happened. She expected anger, at Margaret for making a scene, at her for somehow causing it. Instead, Caleb just looked tired. "Mrs. Hendricks is married to Tom," he said finally. "She was probably one of the people spreading the stories to begin with." "I know," Margaret said. "That's why I said it." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "You can't fight the whole town, Margaret." "Maybe not, but I can fight for people who matter." She looked at Clara. "Miss Whitmore matters." Something shifted in the cabin, in the space between the three of them. Clara felt it like a physical thing, like crossing a threshold she hadn't known was there. "All right," Caleb said slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. Margaret, you and your brothers are going to help Miss Whitmore walk home tonight. All 9 of you, together, where everyone can see. And tomorrow at church, we're going to sit with her." Clara's eyes went wide. "Caleb, you can't. The town can think what it wants." Caleb's voice was firm. "But they're going to see that we stand with you. Maybe that'll shut a few mouths. Maybe it won't. Either way, you're not facing them alone anymore." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it wasn't worth it, that associating with her would only make things harder for his family. But the way Margaret was looking at her father, with such fierce pride, stopped the words in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, all 10 of them walked into town together, Caleb in front, the 9 children spread around Clara like a protective guard. People stared from windows and doorways. Clara kept her head up, kept walking, even though her heart was hammering. At the boarding house, Ada was waiting on the porch. She took one look at the group and smiled. "Well," she said, "that's going to get people talking." "Let them talk," Caleb said. He tipped his hat to Ada. "Ma'am." "Mercer." Ada's eyes were bright with something that might have been approval. "You're a decent man." "I'm a man who's tired of watching good people get torn down by gossips." He turned to Clara. "We'll see you Sunday. Church starts at 10. He herded his children back up the trail, leaving Clara and Ada on the porch. "You know what you've done?" Ada asked quietly. "Made everything worse?" "Made a choice." Ada held the door open. "Choices matter out here. People respect them even when they disagree." Clara went inside, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that whatever happened next, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Sunday morning, Clara put on Margaret's mother's dress, the good one, save for special occasions, and walked to the small church at the end of town. Her stomach was in knots. The Mercers were waiting outside, all 9 children in their best clothes, hair combed, faces scrubbed clean. Caleb stood with them in a suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. "Ready?" he asked Clara. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked in together and every head turned. Clara felt the stairs like physical weight, but Caleb's steady presence beside her kept her moving forward. They sat in the third pew, Clara between Caleb and Margaret, the other children filling in around them. The whispers started immediately, but Clara forced herself not to listen. The sermon was about forgiveness, about casting stones, about judgment. The preacher, an old man named Reverend Morrison, kept glancing at their pew, and Clara wondered if he'd chosen his text specifically for today. When it was over, people filed out slowly, clearly wanting to see what would happen next. Caleb kept his hand on Clara's elbow, guiding her through the crowd. Mrs. Hendricks blocked their path at the door. "Mr. Mercer," she said loudly, "I'm surprised to see you here with that woman, especially after your daughter's display yesterday." "My daughter was defending someone who deserved defending," Caleb replied calmly. "Nothing wrong with that. She was rude and disrespectful. She was honest. If you can't handle honesty, Mrs. Hendricks, that's your problem, not hers." Mrs. Hendricks's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Behind her, Clara could see other townspeople watching waiting to see which way this would fall. Then Reverend Morrison appeared at Caleb's shoulder. "Mrs. Hendricks, perhaps you missed the part of today's sermon about judgment and mercy." "Reverend, surely you don't approve of—" "I approve of a man standing by his convictions and protecting someone who needs protecting." The Reverend's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Whitmore has done nothing wrong that I can see. Perhaps we should all examine our own behavior before we criticize hers." It wasn't a complete vindication, but it was something. Clara saw Mrs. Hendricks' face redden, saw her turn and stalk away. A few people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, like maybe they were reconsidering their participation in the gossip. "Thank you, Reverend," Clara managed. "Don't thank me, child. Thank Mr. Mercer and his brave daughter." He smiled at Margaret. "You spoke truth yesterday. That takes courage." As they walked away from the church, Ruth slipped her small hand into Clara's. "Are people still going to be mean to you?" she asked. Clara squeezed her hand. "Probably, but maybe not as many of them." "Good," Ruth said fiercely, "because you're nice and they're stupid." "Ruth," Margaret hissed, but she was smiling. Back at the cabin, the children scattered to their Sunday activities, reading, games, small chores. Clara helped prepare lunch while Caleb disappeared into the barn to check on a horse with a bad leg. She was peeling potatoes when Margaret came up beside her. "Miss Whitmore, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "After Ma died, Pa stopped going to church for a while. He said he couldn't sit there and listen to people talk about how it was all part of a plan, how Ma was in a better place now." Margaret's hands twisted together. "This is the first time in 2 years he's gone and not looked like he wanted to run." Clara set down her knife. "Margaret, I think it's because of you. I think having someone to protect made him feel like himself again." Margaret looked up, her eyes fierce. "So whatever happens, however hard the town makes it, thank you for giving him that." Clara pulled Margaret into another hug. This girl who was too young to be so wise and too wise to ever be truly young again. "You gave me something too," Clara whispered. "All of you did. You gave me a reason to stop running." That night, after Clara had gone back to the boarding house and the children were in bed, Caleb sat alone by the fire and thought about the woman who'd stumbled into his life during a storm. He'd told himself he was helping her because it was the right thing to do, told himself the teaching arrangement was practical, nothing more. But watching her with his children, seeing how Margaret had defended her, feeling the shift in his own chest when Clara smiled, he couldn't lie to himself anymore. He was falling for her. Had been since that first morning when she'd sat at his table in his dead wife's dress and made his children laugh for the first time in months. And that terrified him more than any storm ever could. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. 3 weeks after the church incident, a stranger rode into town on a black horse that looked like it cost more than most people's houses. Clara saw him from the boarding house window. Tall, well-dressed in expensive Eastern clothes, with silver hair and the kind of face that probably made women stupid when he was younger. He dismounted in front of the hotel like he owned it, handed the reins to a boy with a coin that flashed gold in the sunlight. Something cold crawled up Clara's spine. "Ada," she called. "Who's that?" Ada came to the window, looked out, and frowned. "Don't know, but he's got money. That's clear enough. Why?" "I don't know. Something about him feels wrong." "Well, he's not our problem unless he boards here." Which he won't, looking like that. "He'll take the hotel." Ada turned back to her cooking. "Stop borrowing trouble, girl." But Clara couldn't shake the feeling. She watched the stranger disappear into the hotel, watched how the townspeople stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and the automatic deference people showed to obvious wealth. She was still thinking about it that evening when she walked to the Mercer cabin for lessons. The children were waiting outside, playing some kind of game that involved a lot of running and screaming. "Miss Whitmore!" Benjamin shouted, racing over. "Guess what? Pa said if we finish our lessons early, we can go fishing." "Then we'd better get started," Clara said, ruffling his hair. Inside, Caleb was working on a broken wagon wheel, his hands covered in grease. He looked up when she came in and something softened in his expression, something that made Clara's stomach flip in a way she tried very hard to ignore. "Evening," he said. "Evening. Benjamin tells me there's fishing involved if everyone behaves." "Bribery. It's a parenting strategy." He wiped his hands on a rag. "There's coffee if you want it." "I always want coffee." She poured herself a cup and got the children settled. Margaret was deep into a book about ancient Rome, asking questions about aqueducts and military tactics that Clara had to admit she wasn't entirely qualified to answer. The twins were working on multiplication tables with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Ruth was practicing her letters, tongue poking out in concentration. It felt normal. Good. Like maybe this was what her life could be, teaching, helping, being part of something that mattered. Then Samuel looked up from his reader and said, "Pa, there's a fancy man outside." Everyone froze. Caleb set down the wagon wheel and moved to the window. Clara saw his whole body go tense. "Kids, keep working," he said quietly. Then to Clara, "You know a man named Victor Hale?" The coffee cup slipped from Clara's hands and shattered on the floor. Victor Hale. Here. How did he find her? Why was he here? "Clara?" Caleb's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You know him?" She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at the spreading pool of coffee and broken ceramic while her brain screamed at her to run, hide, do something. Margaret had grabbed a rag and was cleaning up the spill, throwing worried glances at Clara. The younger children had gone quiet, sensing something was wrong. "Stay here," Caleb said. He grabbed his rifle from above the door and went outside. Through the window, Clara watched him approach the black horse and its rider. Victor Hale sat relaxed in his saddle, smiling like he'd just arrived at a pleasant social call. "Can I help you?" Caleb's voice carried through the open door. "Perhaps. I'm looking for a woman named Clara Whitmore. I was told she might be found here." Victor's voice was smooth, cultured, the kind of voice that made people trust him. "Are you acquainted with her?" "Might be." "Who's asking?" "My name is Victor Hale. I'm an old friend of Clara's from back east. I have some urgent family business to discuss with her." He smiled wider. "Nothing to be alarmed about, just a friendly visit." "If it was friendly, you wouldn't need to track her down." Caleb's grip on the rifle was visible now. "And if it was family business, her family would be here, not you." Victor's smile never wavered. "I can see you're protective of her. Admirable. But I assure you my intentions are entirely proper. Perhaps if I could speak with Clara directly." "No." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Whatever you want with her, the answer's no. Now get off my property." Victor's smile finally slipped. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand you rode onto my land unasked, looking for a woman who clearly doesn't want to be found. That's all I need to understand." Caleb raised the rifle just slightly. "You've got 10 seconds to turn that horse around." For a long moment, Victor just stared at him. Then he laughed, a cold, ugly sound that made Clara's skin crawl even from inside the cabin. "You have no idea what you're protecting," Victor said. "Clara Whitmore is not who she's pretended to be. But you'll learn that soon enough." He gathered his reins. "Tell her I'll be staying in town for a few days. I do hope she'll reconsider speaking with me. It would be unfortunate if I had to pursue other methods of contact." He wheeled his horse around and rode off. Caleb stood watching until he disappeared from sight, then came back inside. Clara was sitting on the floor now, her back against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The children were clustered around Margaret, who had her arms around the younger ones and was staring at Clara with wide, frightened eyes. Caleb crouched down in front of Clara. "Who is he?" "He's—" Clara's voice broke. "He's the reason I had to leave. The reason I came west in the first place." "Did he hurt you?" Not the way you mean. But he tried to. After my divorce, he started coming around, bringing gifts, making offers. I told him no. I told him 100 times no. He wouldn't stop." The words were tumbling out now, years of fear and shame spilling over. "He said I should be grateful, said no other man would want damaged goods. When I still refused, he got angry, started spreading rumors about me, made it impossible for me to find work. I finally left because I was afraid of what he'd do if I stayed." "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb's voice was carefully controlled. "When you first got here, why didn't you say someone might be looking for you?" "Because I thought I'd escaped. I thought he'd given up." Clara wiped at her eyes angrily. "I thought I could have a fresh start without dragging my past along with me." Margaret spoke up from across the room. "What does he want?" "Me." Clara laughed bitterly. He wants me to go back with him, to be his mistress, I suppose. He's obsessed with the idea that I'm his, that my refusal is just some kind of game. That's not going to happen, Caleb said flatly. You don't understand what he's like. He's rich, connected. He'll find a way to make my life hell until I give in or run again. Then we don't let him. Caleb stood up. Margaret, take your brothers and sister fishing like we planned. Stay by the creek. Don't go anywhere else. Take the rifle. Pop. Now, Margaret. The children filed out silently, Margaret carrying the rifle and looking back at Clara with an expression that was far too old for 15. When they were gone, Caleb sat down beside Clara on the floor. Tell me everything, from the beginning. So she did. She told him about her first marriage, about the doctor's diagnosis, about the divorce and the shame that followed. She told him about Victor appearing at her door with flowers and compliments, how his attention had seemed flattering at first and then became suffocating. She told him about the rumors he'd spread when she rejected him, that she was a whore, that she'd stolen from her husband, that she was mentally unstable. She told him about losing her job, her home, her reputation, until running west seemed like her only option. I thought Edgar Boone was my escape, she finished. Turns out I was just trading one nightmare for another. And now Victor's found me anyway. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You're not alone this time. Caleb, you don't have to... Yes, I do. He looked at her directly. You think I don't know what it's like to feel trapped? To feel like the world's decided who you are, and there's nothing you can do about it? He stood up, paced to the window. After Sarah died, people treated me like I was broken. Either they pitied me, or they avoided me, or they told me it was time to move on, like grief has a schedule. For 2 years, I was the tragic widower, the man who couldn't keep his wife alive. Clara started to protest, but he kept talking. Then you showed up, and you looked at me and my kids like we were people, not a tragedy. You didn't try to fix us or save us or pity us. You just helped, like it was normal, like we deserved it. He turned back to her. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was dead. I'm not letting some rich bastard take you away because he can't handle being told no. What can you possibly do against someone like him? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He held out his hand. Come on, let's go find the kids and pretend to fish while we think. Clara took his hand and let him pull her up. His grip was warm, solid, real. For the first time since she'd seen Victor Hale through the window, she felt like maybe she could breathe. They walked down to the creek where the children were spread out along the bank, lines in the water. Margaret had positioned herself where she could see anyone approaching, the rifle propped against a rock beside her. Any bites? Caleb called. Benjamin caught a boot, Samuel reported. Does that count? Only if we're having boot for dinner. The kids laughed, and some of the tension eased. Clara sat on the bank next to Ruth, who immediately leaned against her. That man was scary, Ruth whispered. I know, sweetheart. Is he going to take you away? Clara wrapped her arm around the little girl. No, I'm not going anywhere. She hoped it was a promise she could keep. That night, back at the boarding house, Ada was waiting in Clara's room. We need to talk, she said. Clara closed the door. How much do you know? Enough. Victor Hale checked into the hotel, started asking questions about you. Real careful questions, real polite-like, but questions just the same. Ada's mouth was a thin line. He's building a case against you. A case? For what? Theft, from what I can gather. Claims you stole valuable items from your former husband when you left. Says he's been trying to recover them for months. Tracked you here. Ada fixed Clara with a hard stare. Is it true? No, I took my own things. My mother's jewelry, some dresses, books. Nothing that belonged to him. Can you prove it? Clara felt her stomach drop. I don't know. The jewelry was my mother's, given to me before she died. The lawyer who handled the divorce saw the list, but that was back east. I don't have any papers with me. Then it's your word against his. And he's got money and connections, and you're the woman everyone already thinks is desperate and dishonest. Ada stood up. This is bad, Clara. I know. He's going to the sheriff tomorrow, filing a formal complaint. Sheriff Dawson's a decent man, but if there's a warrant from back east, he'll have to arrest you. The room tilted. Clara sat down hard on her bed. There's no warrant. There can't be. I didn't steal anything. Doesn't matter if he paid someone to create one. Ada's expression was grim. Rich men can buy a lot of things, including justice. Clara pressed her hands to her face. This was it. This was how Victor would win, not by dragging her back east himself, but by having the law do it for him. And once she was arrested, once she was taken back east in chains, he'd have her exactly where he wanted her. I have to run, she said. Tonight. Before... And go where? He found you once. He'll find you again. You run now. You look guilty. Ada grabbed Clara's shoulders. You want to beat him? You stand and fight. Make him prove his lies in front of everyone. How am I supposed to fight someone with his kind of money? The same way you fought everything else, with truth and stubborn refusal to quit. Ada's grip tightened. And you're not fighting alone. Caleb Mercer made that clear. I'm making it clear. Reverend Morrison's on your side. Even some of the townspeople are starting to question the gossip. You've got more support than you think. Clara wanted to believe her, but she'd learned the hard way that support dissolved fast when things got dangerous. Get some sleep, Ada said. Tomorrow's going to be hell, and you need to be sharp for it. She left, and Clara lay on her bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn. Morning came too fast. Clara forced herself to eat breakfast, to go through her normal routine, even though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock on the boarding house door. Sheriff Dawson stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore, I need you to come with me. What's the charge? Ada demanded, appearing at Clara's shoulder. Theft. A Mr. Victor Hale has presented evidence that Miss Whitmore stole valuable property from her former husband. He looked at Clara apologetically. I'm sorry. I have to bring you in. Clara's vision swam. This was happening. This was actually happening. She's not going anywhere without a witness, Ada said firmly. I'm coming with her. Ada, you don't have to... Shut up and move. They walked to the sheriff's office with what felt like the entire town watching. Clara kept her head up, kept moving, even though every step felt like walking toward her own execution. Inside the office, Victor Hale sat in a chair looking calm and satisfied. He stood when Clara entered. Clara, I wish you'd simply talk to me. This could have all been avoided. Mr. Hale, Sheriff Dawson said, settling behind his desk. Present your evidence. Victor pulled out papers, official-looking documents with seals and signatures. This is an inventory from the estate settlement of Clara's former marriage. It lists several items, jewelry specifically, that were to remain with the husband as part of the marital property. Clara was seen taking these items when she left. I've been attempting to recover them on behalf of her former husband's family. That's a lie, Clara said. Those were my mother's. They were never part of the settlement. Do you have proof of that? Sheriff Dawson asked. No, not with me, but the lawyer who handled the divorce knew. Names? Victor interrupted smoothly. Of this lawyer? Contact information? Clara's mind went blank. She'd been so desperate to escape, so focused on just getting away, that she hadn't thought to bring those kinds of details with her. That's what I thought, Victor said. Sheriff, I have the inventory, properly notarized. I have witness statements from people who saw Clara take the items. And I have this. He pulled out another document. A warrant issued for Clara's arrest for theft, signed by a judge in her home county. Sheriff Dawson took the warrant, examined it carefully. His face was troubled. This looks legitimate. It's not, Clara insisted. He paid someone. Be careful making accusations you can't prove, Victor said, his voice still pleasant. It's a serious crime to defame someone's character. The irony was so thick, Clara almost laughed. Sheriff, I need to speak with my accuser, came a voice from the doorway. Caleb stood there with Margaret, William, Thomas, and Samuel behind him. He'd left the younger ones at home, Clara realized, brought the ones old enough to understand what was happening. Mr. Mercer, this is official business. And Miss Whitmore is my children's teacher. I have a right to know what's happening. Caleb stepped forward, looking at Victor. You said Clara stole from her husband. What exactly did she steal? Jewelry, family heirlooms worth a significant sum. And these heirlooms, they're important to the family? Sentimental value? Extremely important. Then why wait months to come looking for them? Why not report the theft immediately? Victor's smile slipped slightly. The family was attempting to resolve this quietly, Or maybe because there was no theft and you're making this up to force Clara back east for your own reasons. Caleb's voice was hard. Tell the sheriff why you were really at my cabin yesterday. Tell him what you told me about Clara. I simply said I was an old friend. You said she was damaged goods. You said she should be grateful for your attention. Caleb turned to Sheriff Dawson. This man's been stalking Clara since back east. She came west to escape him. Now he's using the law to do what threats couldn't, force her into his control. That's absurd, Victor said, but there was an edge to his voice now. I have no personal interest in Clara beyond recovering stolen property. Then why did you tell me you'd been pursuing her for months? Why did you say it would be unfortunate if you had to use other methods to contact her? Sheriff Dawson was looking between them, clearly trying to sort truth from lies. Pa's telling the truth, Margaret spoke up. I heard it too. That man was making threats. She's a child, Victor snapped. She doesn't understand what she heard. I understand plenty, Margaret shot back. I understand you're trying to hurt Miss Whitmore because she won't do what you want. And I understand you're using money and fake papers to do it because you can't accept that she doesn't want you. The office went dead silent. Sheriff Dawson set the warrant down slowly. Mr. Hale, these are serious counter-accusations. Made by a backwoods rancher and children who've clearly been coached, Victor said, but his composure was cracking. Sheriff, I have legal documents. They have stories. Stories from multiple witnesses, Caleb said. And you still haven't explained why you waited so long to report this alleged theft. Or why you personally came all the way west instead of hiring someone to do it. Or why you're staying in town making inquiries about Clara's character if all you want is stolen property returned. Because I wanted to handle this discreetly. Discreetly? You've been in town one day and already the whole place knows about it. Ada spoke up for the first time. That's not discreet. That's deliberate. Victor's mask finally fell away completely. You have no idea who you're protecting, he snarled at Caleb. Clara Whitmore destroyed her first marriage with her coldness. Her inability to be what a man needs. She's a failure as a woman, and I was willing to overlook that, to give her a place despite her defects. Get out of my office, Sheriff Dawson said quietly. Victor stopped mid-rant. What? I said get out. That warrant might be real, might be fake. I'll need to verify it. But right now, listening to you talk about Miss Whitmore like she's property you're trying to reclaim? The sheriff stood up. That tells me everything I need to know about your motivations. And until I can verify these documents properly, I'm not arresting anyone. You're making a grave mistake, maybe. But it's mine to make. Now get out before I arrest you for disturbing the peace. Victor looked around the office, at Clara's determined face, at Caleb's protective stance, at the children staring at him with open hostility. Then he smiled, cold and promising. This isn't over, he said, not by a long shot. He walked out, and Clara felt her knees buckle. Caleb caught her, held her upright while she tried to remember how to breathe. You all right? He murmured. No, but I will be. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. Miss Whitmore, I can't promise this goes away. If that warrant is legitimate, it's not, Clara said firmly. Those items were mine. My mother's jewelry given to me before she died. I can get proof. I can write to the lawyer, to my mother's sister who witnessed the transfer. Do it, and fast. The sheriff looked troubled. Because if Mr. Hale has the right connections, he can make trouble even with a fake warrant. I'll do what I can to slow things down, but you need evidence, real evidence. I'll get it, Clara promised. Outside the office, a small crowd had gathered. News traveled fast in small towns. Clara saw Mrs. Hendricks, saw Tom, saw a dozen other faces she recognized from church or the store. She expected accusations, expected judgment. Instead, Reverend Morrison stepped forward. Is it true what they're saying? That man's trying to have you arrested for theft? Yes. Is it true you stole from your former husband? Clara met his eyes directly. No, sir. It's not. The Reverend studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd. I've known Clara Whitmore for 2 months now. In that time, she's worked hard, kept her head down, and done nothing but try to build a decent life. Meanwhile, she's been the subject of vicious gossip and cruelty from people who don't know her but judged her anyway. Some of the crowd had the grace to look ashamed. Now a rich stranger shows up making accusations. And we have a choice. We can believe him because he's got money and official-looking papers. Or we can believe the woman who's been living among us, teaching our children, proving herself day after day. He looked around at the faces. I know which one I believe. Me too, Ada said loudly. And me, Margaret added. Us too, William and Thomas said together. One by one, more voices joined in. Not everyone. Mrs. Hendricks turned and walked away, and Tom followed her, and a few others looked uncertain. But enough people spoke up that Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. That night, Clara sat at the table in her tiny room and wrote 3 letters. One to the lawyer who'd handled her divorce, one to her aunt back east, and one to the courthouse where her mother's will had been filed. She wrote carefully, explaining what she needed and why, begging for help. Then she sealed them and prayed they'd arrive in time, because Victor Hale wasn't done. She could feel it like a storm building on the horizon, and when it broke, she'd need more than testimonials and good intentions to survive it. The letters went out on the morning stage, and Clara tried not to think about how long it would take for responses to come back. 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3. A lot could happen in 3 weeks. Victor made sure of it. The first blow came 3 days later when Clara arrived at the general store to find the owner, Mr. Peterson, looking uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore, I'm afraid I can't extend you credit anymore. Clara stared at him. I've never asked for credit. I pay cash for everything. I know, but... He glanced toward the back of the store where his wife was conspicuously rearranging canned goods. There's been talk about the theft charges, and some folks are saying it wouldn't be right to do business with someone who might be a criminal. Some folks, Claire repeated flatly. Or one specific person with money to spread around? Peterson had the grace to look ashamed. Look, I got a business to run. I can't afford to lose customers over this. So you're losing me instead. I'm sorry, truly. But he didn't take it back. Clara left without the supplies she'd come for. Outside, she saw Mrs. Hendricks watching from across the street with satisfaction written all over her pinched face. At the boarding house, Ada was furious. Peterson's a coward. Always has been. He's protecting his livelihood, Clara said tiredly. I can't blame him for that. I can, and I do. Ada slammed a pot onto the stove. Victor Hale's been visiting businesses all over town, suggesting it would be bad for trade to associate with you, implying that people who support you might find themselves facing difficulties. He's isolating me, making sure I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Clara sat down at the kitchen table. It's what he did back east. He's good at it. Well, he hasn't gotten to everyone yet. Caleb Mercer sent word. He wants you to come to the cabin tomorrow. Says he has something to discuss. Clara's stomach tightened. He's going to tell me to stop coming. It's too dangerous for his family to be associated with me. Or maybe he's going to tell you the opposite. Stop assuming the worst. Ada pointed a wooden spoon at her. That man's got more spine than half this town combined. Give him some credit. The next morning, Clara made the walk to the cabin with her stomach in knots. She'd barely slept, running through scenarios in her head, trying to prepare herself for Caleb telling her to stay away from his children. But when she arrived, the whole family was waiting. All 9 children lined up outside like they had something important to say. Miss Whitmore, Margaret spoke first, her voice formal. We had a family meeting last night. We took a vote. It was unanimous. Clara's heart sank. Here it came. We want you to move in with us, Benjamin blurted out, unable to contain himself. Clara's brain stuttered to a halt. What? Caleb stepped forward, looking slightly embarrassed by his son's enthusiasm. What Benjamin means is, we talked about your situation, about Victor Hale trying to pressure you by cutting off your support in town, and we figured the best way to fight that is to make sure you're not dependent on the town. You'd have room and board here, Margaret added. You'd keep teaching us, help with the household work. We'd pay you a proper wage, better than the boarding house. And you'd be safer, Samuel said. Pa says Mr. Hale can't hurt you if we're all watching out for you. Clara looked at the 9 eager faces, then at Caleb, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. This is insane, she said. The town already gossips about me coming here twice a week. If I actually live here, let them gossip, William said. They're going to anyway. At least this way you're not alone. You don't understand what you're offering. Victor will use this against all of you. He'll make it sound improper, scandalous. Only if people choose to see it that way, Caleb interrupted. And I'm done worrying about what people choose to see. My kids need help. You need a safe place. It seems straightforward to me. Caleb, I talked to Reverend Morrison yesterday, explained the situation. He said he'd make it clear from the pulpit that you're here as governess and housekeeper, that it's a proper employment arrangement. Caleb's voice was steady, certain. He'll vouch for your character. So will Ada. And anyone who wants to make something dirty out of it can take it up with me directly. Clara felt tears threatening. You're risking everything for me. Your reputation, your children standing in the community. Are standing? Margaret laughed, but there was an edge to it. Miss Whitmore, we're the family with 9 kids and no mother. People already pity us or avoid us, or treat us like we're contagious with grief. You think having you here is going to make that worse? She's right, Thomas added quietly. You're the first person in 2 years who didn't look at us like we were broken. Everyone else sees the dead mother and the overwhelmed father and the too many children. You just saw us. Ruth had worked her way forward and grabbed Clara's hand. Please stay. We need you. Clara looked down at the little girl, then around at all of them. This chaotic, stubborn, fierce family that had adopted her without asking permission. These people who'd defended her in town, who'd stood with her against Victor, who were now offering her sanctuary even though it would cost them. I need to think about it, she managed. It's a big decision. Take your time, Caleb said. The offer stands. But Clara, however you decide, you're not fighting Victor Hale alone. That's not negotiable. That afternoon, after the lessons were done and the children were occupied with chores, Clara found herself helping Margaret in the garden while Caleb repaired fence posts within earshot. Why are you really doing this? Clara asked quietly. And don't tell me it's just about needing help. You managed for 2 years without me. Margaret was quiet for a moment, pulling weeds with fierce concentration. You know what the worst part was? After Ma died? Clara shook her head. It wasn't the grief. I mean, that was terrible, but we all had that together. The worst part was watching Pa disappear. Margaret sat back on her heels. He was there physically, but the person he'd been, he was just gone. He went through the motions, fed us, clothed us, kept the ranch running, but it was like watching a ghost do chores. She looked over at her father, who was hammering a post into the ground with methodical efficiency. Then you showed up, and I watched him come back to life. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. He laughs now. He makes jokes with the kids. He sits with us at dinner instead of just eating and leaving. You did that. You made him remember how to be a person instead of just a survivor. Clara's throat was tight. Margaret! So yeah, we're doing this partly because you need help, but we're also doing it because we need you. All of us. Even if Pa's too stubborn to say it directly. Margaret went back to weeding. That's why we voted. That's why it was unanimous. We're not letting you go without a fight. Clara wiped at her eyes, not caring that her hands were dirty. You're too young to be this wise. I'm too young to be a lot of things. Doesn't stop me from being them. That evening, Clara walked back to the boarding house with a decision made. She'd move to the cabin. She'd accept their help. And she'd stop trying to face everything alone. Ada took the news with her typical bluntness. About damn time. You've been martyring yourself since you got here. Maybe now you'll remember that asking for help isn't the same as weakness. I'll miss you, Clara said. I'm not dying, girl. I'm 3 miles away. You can visit. Ada handed her a bundle. Take these. Extra blankets. It gets cold up in those mountains. Ada, stop arguing and pack your things. Mercers are expecting you tomorrow. Clara moved into the cabin on a Thursday. The children had cleared space in the main room, rigging up a curtain for privacy. It wasn't much, barely more space than her room at the boarding house, but it felt different. It felt like being part of something. The first few days were an adjustment. The cabin was loud and chaotic, with 9 children constantly in motion. Clara had forgotten what it was like to live around family, to hear laughter and arguments, and the everyday noise of people existing together. She fell into the rhythm of it, teaching in the mornings, helping with meals and mending in the afternoons, reading to the younger children before bed. It was exhausting and overwhelming and more work than the boarding house had ever been. It was also the happiest she'd been in years. But Victor Hale wasn't finished. A week after Clara moved in, Sheriff Dawson rode up to the cabin looking grim. Miss Whitmore, I need to speak with you. Clara's stomach dropped. What is it? New information's come to light about those theft charges. He dismounted heavily. Can we talk inside? In the cabin, with Caleb and Margaret present as witnesses, the sheriff laid out papers on the table. Mr. Hales provided additional evidence. Witness statements from people who claim you stole more than just jewelry. They're saying you took money, forged documents, manipulated your husband's business associates. He looked uncomfortable. One of them claims you tried to blackmail your husband into giving you more than your legal share of the marital assets. That's not true, Claire said. None of that's true. Who are these witnesses? Business associates of your former husband. 2 of them, both willing to testify. He pushed one of the papers toward her. You recognize these names? Clara looked at the signatures and felt ice in her veins. Yes, they were friends of my ex-husband. They were also friends of Victor Hale. They used to come to dinner parties together. So you admit you know them? I admit I met them at social functions. I never had business dealings with any of them, and I certainly never blackmailed anyone. Clara's hands were shaking. Sheriff, this is exactly what I warned you about. Victor's using his connections to create false evidence. Then you need to prove it's false, because right now I've got multiple sworn statements saying otherwise. Sheriff Dawson stood up. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I tried to give you time to get your proof, but with these new testimonies, I can't wait any longer. I have to arrest you. No, Caleb said flatly. You're not taking her. Mr. Mercer, don't make this harder. Did you read those statements carefully? Did you question anything about them? What's there to question? They're sworn testimonies from men who are financially connected to Victor Hale. Caleb grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly. Look at this one. He claims Clara manipulated business deals in August of last year, but Clara's divorce was finalized in June. She was already gone by August. Sheriff Dawson took the paper back, frowning. That could be a mistake in dates, or it could be a lie. And this one, he says Clara forged documents related to a property sale. What property? Where? When? There are no specifics because there's no truth to it. Caleb was building momentum now. Sheriff, you're being played. Hale's bringing you fake witnesses with vague accusations designed to sound serious without being verifiable. If you arrest Clara based on this, you're doing his dirty work for him. I still have to follow the law, Sit. Then follow it properly. Investigate these men. Find out if they actually witnessed what they claim. Get specifics. Get dates and locations and details that can be checked. Caleb stepped between Clara and the sheriff. But you're not taking her based on paper testimonies from men who are clearly connected to her accuser. The 2 men stared at each other. Margaret had grabbed Clara's hand and was holding it tight enough to hurt. Finally, Sheriff Dawson sighed. I'll give you 3 more days, 3 days to prove these statements are false. But if you can't, we will, Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. Because they are false, and we're going to prove it. After the sheriff left, Clara sat at the table with her head in her hands, while the children scattered to give the adults privacy. This is getting worse, she said. He's escalating. Soon it won't matter whether I have proof or not. He'll have created enough doubt that people will believe him anyway. Then we stop waiting for your letters to arrive, Caleb said. We go on the offensive. How? He's got money and connections, and I've got nothing. You've got us, and you've got the truth. Caleb sat down across from her. Victor Hale's been operating like he's invisible, like no one would question him because of his wealth and position. But he made mistakes. He told me things that first day, let his mask slip in the sheriff's office. People saw him lose control. So what? That doesn't prove anything. It proves he's not as untouchable as he thinks. And if he's made mistakes here, he's probably made them before. Caleb leaned forward. We need to find out everything we can about Victor Hale. His business dealings, his reputation back east, whether there are other women he's done this to. If we can show a pattern of behavior, that would take weeks, months. I don't have that kind of time. Maybe not, but we can start now. He looked toward the door where Margaret was hovering, clearly listening. Margaret, come here. Margaret came in, trying to look innocent. I wasn't eavesdropping. Yes, you were, and I need you to do more of it. Caleb pulled out paper and a pencil. Victor Hale's staying at the hotel. I want you to talk to the staff there, the maids, the cook, anyone who sees him regularly. Find out what he says when he thinks no one important is listening. Rich men like him never see servants as real people. They talk freely around them. Pa, I don't know if I can just walk into the hotel, but tell them you're looking for work. Tell them your father needs extra money. Whatever story gets you in." He looked at Clara. "Do you remember the names of those business associates? The ones who gave statements?" Clara nodded and wrote them down. "Good. I'm writing to the telegraph office. I'll send inquiries to business contacts I still have back east, see what I can learn about these men and their connection to Hale." He stood up. "We've got 3 days. Let's make them count." For the next 72 hours, the cabin became a war room. Margaret disappeared into town each day and came back with information. Victor had been drinking heavily in his room, shouting at the hotel staff, sending telegrams frantically. He'd argued with someone over money, gotten into a shouting match with the telegraph operator over the cost of his messages. Caleb's contacts back east sent back fragments of information. One of the men who'd given a statement against Clara had filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. The other was being investigated for fraud in his own business dealings. Both had received sudden payments from an unknown source shortly before giving their testimonies. Clara spent hours writing down everything she could remember about Victor, his habits, his connections, the other women she'd seen him pursue before fixating on her. She remembered names, dates, incidents that had seemed minor at the time, but formed a pattern when laid out together. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Dawson returned as promised. "Time's up," he said. "What have you got?" They showed him everything. Margaret's reports of Victor's erratic behavior, the financial information about the witnesses, Clara's detailed account of Victor's obsession with her. The sheriff studied it all carefully. Then he said, "This is good work, but it's not proof. It's circumstantial at best." Clara felt her last hope crumble. Then hoofbeats sounded outside, and Ada burst through the door waving an envelope. "It came on the stage," she said breathlessly, "from back east. It's addressed to you, Clara." Clara's hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter from her aunt, and copies of her mother's will, clearly showing that all jewelry had been left to Clara, with a notarized statement from the lawyer who'd witnessed it. "This proves the jewelry was mine," Clara said. "This proves there was no theft." "That's one charge down," Sheriff Dawson acknowledged. "But what about the others? The blackmail? The forgery?" Another writer appeared, the telegraph operator, red-faced and angry. "Sheriff, I need to report a crime. That Hale fellow's been trying to bribe me to lose incoming telegrams addressed to Miss Whitmore. When I refused, he threatened me." The operator pulled out a wad of bills. "He left this on the counter and told me to reconsider. That's attempted bribery, isn't it?" Sheriff Dawson's expression hardened. "Yes, it is." "And there's more." The operator held up a telegram. "This just came in. It's from a sheriff in Pennsylvania. Says Victor Hale is wanted for questioning there in connection with a similar case, harassing a woman who rejected him, making false accusations against her. Charges were dropped when he fled the state." The pieces fell into place with almost audible clicks. "Get him," Sheriff Dawson said quietly. "Bring Victor Hale here, now." Victor arrived 30 minutes later, dragged in by 2 deputies, still protesting his innocence. But when confronted with the evidence, the bribery attempt, the telegram from Pennsylvania, the financial connection between him and his supposed witnesses, his composure finally shattered completely. "She was mine," he shouted, pointing at Clara. "I offered her everything, money, position, respect, and she threw it back in my face like I was nothing." "So you decided to destroy her instead," Sheriff Dawson said coldly. "I decided to show her what happens when women forget their place, when they think they can reject men of worth and walk away unpunished." Victor's face was twisted with rage now, all pretense of civility gone. She needed to learn. They all need to learn. The silence that followed was absolute. "Victor Hale," Sheriff Dawson said formally, "I'm arresting you for bribery, for filing false witness statements, and for harassment, and I'll be wiring Pennsylvania about their warrant." As the deputies hauled Victor away, still screaming about injustice and ungrateful women, Clara felt something break loose in her chest, something that had been wound tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," Caleb confirmed, his hand warm on her shoulder. But even as relief flooded through her, Clara knew this was only part of the battle. Victor was arrested, yes, but there was still Edgar Boone's lies to contend with, still the town's judgment, still the fundamental question of who she was and what kind of life she could build here. The fight wasn't finished. It was just entering a new phase. That evening, after Victor had been locked in the town's small jail and the initial chaos had settled, Clara found herself on the cabin's porch with Caleb while the children finished their dinner inside. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me, for fighting with me." "You don't need to thank me for that." "Yes, I do. Most people wouldn't have. Most people are cowards." Caleb leaned against the porch railing. "You know what I realized while we were gathering all that evidence against Hale? You've been fighting alone your whole life. Your first husband blamed you for his failures. Victor tried to break you for rejecting him. Edgar humiliated you to protect his own reputation. And through all of it, you kept getting back up." Clara looked down at her hands. "I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You could have given in, could have let them define you, could have believed what they said about you being broken or worthless or damaged." He turned to face her. "But you didn't. You kept fighting, kept trying to build something better. That's not weakness, Clara. That's strength most people never find." Clara felt tears threatening again. "I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of fighting." "I know, but maybe you don't have to do it alone anymore." Caleb hesitated, then added quietly, "Maybe you never had to. You just never had anyone show you what it looked like when people actually stood with you instead of behind you." Inside, the children were laughing about something. Clara could hear Ruth's high giggle, Margaret's snort, Benjamin's running commentary. It sounded like home. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now? Now we wait for your letters to arrive confirming everything we already know. We let the law handle Victor Hale, and we figure out what comes next." Caleb pushed off the railing. "But whatever it is, you're not facing it alone. We clear on that?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now come eat before the twins devour everything." As she followed him inside, Clara thought about Margaret's words, about Caleb coming back to life, about needing her. She thought about Ruth's hand in hers, about Benjamin's enthusiasm, about all 9 children voting unanimously to give her sanctuary. She'd come west looking for a man to save her. Instead, she'd found a family that showed her how to save herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was always what she'd needed. Victor Hale's arrest should have been the end of it, but Clara had learned the hard way that vindication rarely came clean. The Pennsylvania warrant arrived 2 days later, confirming Victor's pattern of harassment and false accusations against at least 3 other women. Sheriff Dawson arranged for his transfer back east, and the whole town turned out to watch him loaded onto the prison wagon, still shouting about injustice until someone gagged him. Clara watched from his boarding house porch with Ada, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just exhaustion. "You'd think you'd look happier," Ada observed. "The man who tried to destroy you is going to prison. He's one man, but the damage he did, the things people believed about me, that doesn't just disappear because he got arrested." Ada was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, it doesn't. But it changes the story. And out here, stories are currency." She was right. Over the next week, Clara watched the town's narrative shift like sand in wind. The whispers changed from that barren woman who lied to Edgar Boone to that poor woman who was hunted by that rich lunatic. People who'd avoided her suddenly wanted to express their sympathy, their outrage on her behalf, their certainty that they'd never believed the rumors anyway. It made Clara want to scream. "You don't have to be gracious about it," Margaret said one afternoon when Clara returned from town looking exhausted. "They're rewriting history to make themselves look better. You don't owe them forgiveness." "I don't want to carry around anger at people who don't matter," Clara said. "I'm just tired of performing, tired of being the tragic figure in everyone else's story." "Then stop being their figure and be your own person." Margaret handed her a cup of tea. "You don't have to accept their apologies or their sympathy. You don't have to make them feel better about being cruel. Just exist on your own terms." Clara looked at this 15-year-old girl who somehow understood things it had taken Clara 32 years to learn. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time I learned nobody was coming to save us, so I'd better figure things out myself." Margaret shrugged. "You taught me something, though. You taught me that figuring it out yourself doesn't mean doing it alone. There's a difference." That night, Caleb asked Clara to walk with him after the children were in bed. They headed up the trail behind the cabin, into the forest where she'd once collapsed during a storm, ready to die. "I wanted to show you something," he said. They climbed for 20 minutes until they reached a clearing Clara had never seen before. The moon was full, turning everything silver, and the view stretched for miles, mountains and valleys, and the distant lights of town. Sarah loved this spot, Caleb said quietly. She'd come up here when things got hard, when the kids were overwhelming or I was being stubborn, or she just needed to breathe. Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. After she died, I couldn't come up here, couldn't stand to see the place without her in it. He sat down on a fallen log. But tonight I thought, maybe it's time to make new memories here. Different ones. Not replacing the old, just adding to them. Clara sat beside him. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know something before things go any further between us. Clara's heart started beating faster. Caleb, let me say this. I'm not good at words, but I need to try. He turned to face her. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, the part where I got to be a husband, a partner. I thought all I had left was being a father, and barely managing that. You were grieving. I was hiding. From the kids, from myself, from everything that hurt. And then you showed up, soaking wet and ready to give up. And something in me recognized something in you. He took her hand carefully, like he was afraid she'd pull away. You were fighting so hard to survive, even when you thought you were done. And I realized I'd stopped fighting. I'd just been existing. Clara's throat was tight. You helped me find reasons to keep fighting. And you helped me remember how. How to laugh with my kids instead of just directing them. How to see them as people instead of responsibilities. How to feel things again instead of just pushing through. His grip tightened. I'm not saying this right. What I mean is, I love you, Clara. Not because you saved me or I saved you, but because you're stubborn and fierce, and you don't quit even when quitting would be easier. And my kids love you, and I hope, maybe you feel something too. Clara sat very still, looking at their joined hands. A month ago, she would have panicked at this confession. Would have found reasons why it couldn't work, why she didn't deserve it, why caring for someone just gave them power to hurt her. But she'd learned some things in the past weeks. She'd learned that vulnerability didn't mean weakness, that asking for help didn't make her a failure, that love didn't have to be a trap. Sometimes it was just people choosing each other, over and over, through the hard parts. I'm terrified, she said finally. Every man I've ever trusted has either blamed me for his disappointments or tried to own me. And I know you're different. I can see that you're different, but I don't know how to trust my own judgment anymore. Then don't trust your judgment. Trust mine. Caleb's voice was gentle. I'm telling you right now, in front of all these mountains and the sky and whatever else is listening, I see you, Clara, the real you. Not the broken woman Edgar said you were, not the possession Victor wanted, not the tragic figure the town's trying to make you. I see someone who's flawed and scared and fighting anyway, and I want to stand next to that person. If you'll let me. Clara felt tears spilling over. What if I can't give you more children? What if the doctor was right and Then we don't have more children. I've got 9 already. That's plenty. He wiped her tears with his thumb. And if you're worried about being a mother to them, they already chose you, Clara. That vote wasn't about employment. They wanted you as family. I don't know how to be family. Neither did I, for a long time. We'll figure it out together. Make mistakes together. Get through the hard parts together. He smiled and it transformed his whole face. That's what family is. Not perfection. Just people who keep showing up. Clara kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth or romantic. She just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, tasting salt from her own tears, feeling his surprise and then his response as he pulled her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb laughed shakily. Was that a yes? That was a maybe. I'm willing to try. Clara rested her forehead against his. That was a I'm scared, but I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. That was a you're right about us figuring it out together. I'll take it. They sat in the clearing for another hour, talking about practical things. How to handle the town's reaction, when to make any arrangement official, what it would mean for the children. But underneath the practical conversation was something else. Relief. Hope. The tentative beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. Walking back down the trail, Clara thought about the woman who'd collapsed under a tree during a storm, certain her life was over. That woman had been wrong about so many things. But she'd been right about one. Her old life had ended that night. What she hadn't known was that sometimes endings were just transitions, painful births into something better. The next morning, Clara woke to chaos. Ruth was crying because she'd had a nightmare, the twins were fighting over a missing sock, Benjamin had somehow gotten mud on the ceiling, and Caleb was trying to cook breakfast while also mediating a dispute between William and Thomas about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. "Miss Whitmore!" Ruth ran to her the second she emerged from behind her curtain. "I dreamed you left and didn't come back." Clara picked her up, even though she was getting too big for it. "I'm not leaving, sweetheart." "Promise?" Clara looked over Ruth's head at Caleb, who was watching them with an expression that made her chest ache. "I promise." "Good." Ruth squirmed down. "Can you make Pa's breakfast not burned? He's terrible at it." "I heard that," Caleb called. "You were supposed to," Ruth called back, and Clara burst out laughing. This was what she'd signed up for. Not some idealized fantasy of peaceful domesticity, but the loud, messy, chaotic reality of 9 children and one stubborn man and herself, trying to fit together into something that worked. She wouldn't have it any other way. The official reckoning with Edgar Boone came 3 weeks later, though Clara didn't seek it. The truth found him on its own. Tom Hendricks got drunk one night and let slip to several people at the saloon that Edgar had visited a doctor in the city 2 years ago, a different doctor, one who wouldn't talk, and been told he was the one who couldn't father children. Edgar had hidden this, blamed his first wife for their childlessness, then repeated the pattern with 2 subsequent mail-order brides, driving both away with accusations about their inadequacy. The story spread like wildfire. By the time it reached Clara, Edgar's reputation was in ruins. She was at the general store. Mr. Peterson had quietly rescinded his ban after Victor's arrest when Mrs. Hendricks approached her. The woman looked like she'd aged 10 years, her face drawn and pinched. "Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology." Clara set down the flowers she'd been examining. "Do you? I was cruel. I spread gossip. I judged you without knowing the truth. I made your life harder when you were already struggling." Mrs. Hendricks twisted her hands together. "I was wrong. About everything. And I'm sorry." Clara studied her for a long moment. This apology was costing the woman something. Pride, maybe. Or her certainty that she was always right. "Thank you for saying that," Clara said finally. "But here's what I learned. Your cruelty didn't break me. None of it did. Edgar's rejection, Victor's obsession, this town's whispers. I survived all of it. So while I appreciate the apology, I don't need it to move forward. I already have." Mrs. Hendricks looked stung. "So you won't forgive me?" "I didn't say that. I said I don't need your apology to be whole. There's a difference." Clara picked up her flower again. "Forgiveness isn't about making you feel better. It's about me deciding not to carry your guilt around anymore. So yes, I forgive you. But not because you deserve it, because I deserve peace." She paid for her supplies and left, feeling lighter than she had in months. Outside, Caleb was waiting with the wagon. He took one look at her face and smiled. "Good day?" "Getting better." She climbed up beside him. "Let's go home." Home. The word didn't catch in her throat anymore. Didn't feel like a lie or a hope. Just a simple truth. The proposal came on a Tuesday in late October, when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled like coming snow. Clara was teaching the children mathematics, or trying to, while the twins deliberately gave wrong answers to make Ruth giggle, when Caleb came in from the barn looking nervous. "Kids, go outside for a bit." "But Pa..." "Now." They filed out, Margaret giving Clara a knowing look as she passed. Clara's stomach flipped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just..." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm no good at this. Sarah and I got married because it was practical and expected, and we made it work. But with you, I want to do it right." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple gold, no stones, clearly old. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother, who gave it to me. Sarah wore it for 20 years. He took it out with careful hands. "I know it's not fancy, and I know you might not want something that belonged to someone else, but it's the only thing of value I have to offer, and I wanted..." "Yes," Clara interrupted. Caleb blinked. "I haven't asked yet." "You were going to ask me to marry you, weren't you?" "Well, yes, but I had a whole speech." "Save the speech. The answer is yes." He stared at her for a moment. Then he laughed, pulled her up from her chair, and kissed her so thoroughly that she forgot what day it was. Outside, the children erupted in cheers. They'd clearly been listening at the windows. "About time!" Margaret shouted. "Can we come back in now?" Benjamin yelled. "Do we get cake?" Ruth wanted to know. Caleb broke the kiss, grinning. "We get cake, and a wedding, and a life together. How's that sound?" "Like everything I never knew I needed," Clara said. They married in November in the small church with the whole town watching. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony, and Ada stood up as Clara's witness, while Margaret stood for Caleb. The 8 other children filled the front pew, Benjamin bouncing with barely contained excitement, Ruth clutching a bouquet of the last autumn flowers. Clara wore Margaret's mother's good dress, altered to fit her, with Margaret's blessing, and carried Sarah's old prayer book because Margaret had insisted. "She'd want you to have something of hers," Margaret had said. "She'd want you to know we're not replacing her. We're just making room for you, too." Edgar Boone didn't attend. Neither did Tom Hendricks. But most of the town showed up, curiosity overcoming judgment, and Clara found she didn't care what they thought anymore. Their opinions had no power over her happiness. When Reverend Morrison asked if anyone objected to the union, there was silence. Not even Mrs. Hendricks, sitting in the back pew, made a sound. "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend smiled. "Caleb, you may kiss your bride." He did, and the church erupted in applause and cheers, 9 children loudest among them. At the reception in the church hall, people came forward with congratulations, gifts, advice. Ada hugged Clara so hard it hurt. "You did good, girl. Better than good." "I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for this, don't forget that." Later, as Clara stood watching Caleb dance with Ruth, while the twins tried to steal cake, and Margaret helped Mrs. Patterson carry more food to the tables, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The failures and rejections, the cruelty and fear, the moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. She thought about the woman who'd believed Edgar Boone when he called her useless, who'd internalized Victor Hale's message that she was damaged goods, who'd accepted the doctor's diagnosis as a final judgment on her worth. That woman was gone, not erased, but transformed, forged into something stronger through fire and hardship and the radical act of letting people love her. "You look thoughtful," Caleb said, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. "Just thinking about how I got here." "Regrets?" "Not a single one." She took the punch. "Well, maybe I regret not bringing a parasol when I first arrived. Might have hit Edgar Boone with it." Caleb laughed. "There's my wife, practical and violent." "Your wife?" Clara tested the words. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We've got time." They did. They had time and space, and a house full of chaotic children, and a community slowly learning that redemption was possible, that people could surprise you, that the cruelest judgments were usually wrong. 3 months after the wedding, Clara woke up feeling strange, dizzy, nauseous, overly warm. She made it outside before vomiting behind the woodpile, then sat down hard on the ground, breathing carefully. Margaret found her there. "Miss Whitmore, Ma, are you sick?" Clara had told the children they could call her whatever felt comfortable. Most had settled on Ma, though the older ones sometimes slipped into Miss Whitmore out of habit. "I don't know, I might be coming down with something." She stood up shakily. "Don't tell your father, he'll worry." But Margaret was looking at her with strange intensity. "When was your last monthly?" Clara's brain stuttered. She tried to count backward, lost track, tried again. I don't know. 6 weeks? 7? And you're sick in the mornings, tired, hungry, but nothing sounds good? How do you know about—" Clara stopped. Margaret had helped nurse her mother through 9 pregnancies. Of course she knew the signs. "You think I'm pregnant," Clara whispered. "I think you might be." "But the doctor said—" "Doctors can be wrong." Margaret helped her up. "We should find out for sure. Ada would know what to look for." They walked to town together, Clara's mind spinning. It wasn't possible. The doctor had been certain. Her first husband had blamed her for years before finally accepting the diagnosis. She was barren, broken, unable to do the one thing women were supposed to do naturally. Except maybe she wasn't. Ada took one look at Clara's face and ushered them into the kitchen. What happened? I think I might be pregnant, Clara said, but I can't be. The doctor said, doctors say lots of things. Let me check you over. The examination was quick and thorough. When it was done, Ada sat back with a knowing smile. You're pregnant, maybe 3 months along, from the feel of it. Clara's world tilted. That's not possible. And yet here we are. Ada squeezed her hand. Doctors aren't infallible, Clara. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes bodies surprise us. And sometimes, she paused, choosing words carefully, sometimes the problem was never with you to begin with. Clara understood what she wasn't saying. Her first husband, unable or unwilling to admit his own failings, had accepted the doctor's diagnosis readily because it absolved him. Edgar had rejected her before she even had a chance to try. But Caleb had simply loved her without needing her to prove her worth through fertility. Does this change anything? Margaret asked quietly. Between you and Pa? No, Clara said firmly. Your father married me knowing I probably couldn't have children. This is just a gift we weren't expecting. But gifts could be terrifying too. Clara spent the walk back to the cabin battling fear. What if something went wrong? What if she lost this baby? What if carrying to term damaged her the way it had damaged Sarah? When she got home, Caleb took one look at her face and pulled her aside. What's wrong? I'm pregnant. He went very still. You're sure? Ada confirmed it. For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I know you're scared, he murmured into her hair. I'm scared too. But we'll get through this together. You, me, 9 kids who'll probably drive you crazy with overprotective hovering. We'll figure it out. What if we get 9 more months with this baby? What if everything goes right? What if we stop borrowing trouble and just take it one day at a time? He pulled back to look at her. You've survived everything else. You'll survive this too. Clara wanted to believe him, and maybe, with his arms around her and 9 children who'd already claimed her as theirs, she could start to. The pregnancy was hard. Clara was sick for months, exhausted constantly, and terrified every time she felt a cramp or an unusual pain. But the children rallied around her with fierce protectiveness. Margaret monitored her like a hawk. The boys took over all the heavy work. Ruth became her constant companion. Caleb was steady through all of it, patient when she was irritable, calm when she panicked, always reminding her that fear was allowed but didn't have to be in charge. In her 7th month, Edgar Boone showed up at the cabin. Caleb met him at the door with a rifle. You've got 10 seconds to state your business before I shoot you for trespassing. I came to apologize. Edgar looked older, diminished somehow. To Clara, if she'll see me. Clara came to the door, her pregnancy obvious now, and watched Edgar's face register shock. But I thought... You thought wrong. Clara's voice was cold. About a lot of things. What do you want, Edgar? I heard what happened with Victor Hale. And then the truth about... He couldn't finish. About my own situation. It's all over the territory now. My reputation is destroyed. Good, Clara said flatly. Edgar flinched. I deserve that. I deserve worse. I came to tell you I was wrong. About everything. You weren't the problem. I was. And I'm sorry. Clara looked at this man who'd humiliated her, who'd called her useless and thrown her away, who'd nearly gotten her killed. She felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a distant pity for someone so small he had to destroy others to feel important. I don't accept your apology, she said. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because you didn't come here to make amends. You came here because you're lonely and ruined, and you want me to tell you it's okay. It's not okay. What you did was cruel and cowardly, but it's also not my problem anymore. Clara, shh. I hope you find peace, Edgar. I really do. But you're not going to find it from me. She stepped back. Caleb, show him out. Edgar left, and Clara watched him go without a shred of regret. She'd spent enough of her life caring about men who didn't deserve it. The baby came on a warm day in June, born screaming and healthy into a cabin full of anxious children and one terrified father. Ada delivered her, a girl with dark hair and strong lungs who immediately made her presence known. She's perfect, Margaret breathed, peering at her new sister. Can I hold her? Ruth begged. What's her name? Benjamin wanted to know. Caleb looked at Clara, still holding their daughter, both of them crying. You choose. Clara looked down at the tiny face, then up at the family surrounding them. The 9 children they'd built this life around, who'd welcomed her when she had nothing, who'd fought for her when the world turned against her. Hope, she said. Her name is Hope, because that's what this baby was. Hope that broken things could be mended. Hope that the cruelest diagnoses could be wrong. Hope that endings could birth new beginnings, and that the woman everyone called useless could create life after all. The years that followed were not easy. The cabin got crowded, money was tight, and raising 10 children with wildly different needs was chaos on the best days. Clara and Caleb fought sometimes, about discipline, about money, about whose turn it was to deal with the twins when they got into trouble. But they also laughed. They built a life that was messy and loud and real, where mistakes were allowed and forgiveness was given freely, and love was measured not in grand gestures, but in showing up every day. 3 years after Hope's birth, a young woman arrived in town, barely 20, running from an abusive husband, with nowhere to go and no money. She showed up at the cabin looking desperate, having heard there was a woman here who might understand. Clara took her in without hesitation. Then another woman came, and another. Word spread through the networks of desperate women traveling west that there was a ranch in the mountains where you could find sanctuary, where you'd be believed and protected and helped to find your feet. The cabin became a way station. Women stayed for weeks or months, healing, learning skills, gathering strength. Some moved on to other towns, other lives. Some stayed and became part of the community. All of them left different than they'd arrived, stronger, surer, less willing to accept that their worth was defined by men's opinions. Clara coordinated it all with Margaret's help, now 18 and fierce as her mother had been, with Ada providing resources, and Caleb building additional structures to house the rotating population of women finding their way. It wasn't the life Clara had imagined when she stepped off that wagon to meet Edgar Boone. It was better. It was purposeful and difficult and satisfying in ways she'd never anticipated. One evening, 10 years after that storm-soaked night when she'd collapsed under a tree, ready to die, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Inside, the cabin was full of noise. Her children, Caleb's children, their children, the temporary residents, all existing together in controlled chaos. Caleb came out and stood beside her, his hair graying now, lines deeper around his eyes, but still solid and steady. Regrets? He asked, like he always did. Not a single one, Clara replied, like she always did. And she meant it, because the woman who'd been thrown away as damaged goods had built something beautiful from her brokenness. She'd learned that worth wasn't measured in fertility or submission or meeting men's expectations. Worth was inherent, unkillable, surviving even when everything tried to crush it. She'd learned that the cruelest storms sometimes carried you exactly where you needed to be, that families were built, not born, that love was a choice you made every day, in the small moments and the hard ones. Most importantly, she'd learned that no one could make her useless unless she believed it herself. And she never would again. Hope came running out, 11 now, and full of questions about the woman who'd arrived that afternoon. Behind her, Ruth and the twins were arguing about dinner, and Margaret was trying to mediate while simultaneously reading a book. Ma, Mrs. Patterson says she needs help with her accounts. Can I go tomorrow? After your lessons. But Ma, after your lessons, Hope. Knowledge first, work second. Hope groaned but accepted it, disappearing back inside to complain to her siblings. Caleb laughed. She's as stubborn as you are. Good, she'll need it. Clara leaned against him, fitting into the space at his shoulder that felt like it was carved specifically for her. The world's hard on women. Stubborn helps. Think we're teaching them right? All of them? Clara thought about the girls learning to read and cipher and argue and think for themselves. About the boys learning that strength meant protecting, not dominating. About the women who passed through their doors learning that survival was possible, that starting over was allowed, that their past didn't have to define their future. I think we're teaching them that they're not alone, that community matters, that asking for help is brave, not weak. She looked up at him. That's more than either of us learned growing up, so yeah, I think we're doing all right. Inside, someone dropped something and it shattered, followed by shouting and laughter and Ruth's voice rising above it all demanding order. Should we? Caleb started. Give them 5 minutes. They'll sort it. They did. Because that's what Clara had learned to do. Trust people to solve their own problems while making sure they knew help was available if needed. It was a delicate balance, but one she'd gotten better at over the years. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The failures that felt like endings but were really redirections. The rejections that felt like judgments but were really escapes. The moments of despair that felt like death but were actually births into something better. She thought about Edgar Boone wherever he was, probably still bitter and alone because he'd never learned that controlling others couldn't fill the emptiness inside himself. She thought about Victor Hale, in prison back east, his obsession with possession having destroyed him more thoroughly than any external force could have. She thought about all the people who judged her, pitied her, dismissed her as broken or useless or damaged beyond repair. And she realized she didn't think about them much anymore. They'd become footnotes in a story that was about so much more than their cruelty. They were obstacles she'd overcome, not the defining moments of her life. The defining moments were these: Ruth learning to read, Margaret standing up to town gossips, Caleb saying, "You're not fighting alone anymore," Hope being born healthy and whole, the women who arrived broken and left strong, the family she'd built from nothing, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one act of stubborn refusal to give up at a time. That was her story, not the rejection or the shame or the pain, the survival, the rebuilding, the radical act of believing she deserved better and then creating it herself. "Come on," Caleb said, taking her hand. "Let's go inside before the kids eat everything and we're left with whatever Benjamin decides is food." Clara laughed and followed him into the cabin, into the noise and chaos and love, into the life she'd built from the ashes of everything she thought she'd lost. And as the door closed behind them, shutting out the darkness and holding in the light, Clara thought, this is what victory looks like. Not perfection or vindication or revenge. Just a woman who refused to be broken, surrounded by people who chose to love her anyway, building something beautiful in the spaces between the scars. That was enough. That was everything.